So for me, it was really interesting to talk to Vaughn because there are many things about his story that rang true to me as somebody who loved lots of languages, of course. So I saw him as somebody who had lots of similarities to my own life. And pre-internet, Vaughn, welcome, first of all.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning.
Now, my first question is, how did this passion for languages start with you?
I think it started at a very young age. Is it? Oh, hold it. I grew up bilingual to begin with. My mother being from Orizaba, Veracruz, and my dad being American from Nebraska, the heartland of the U.S. I was born in D.C., but Spanish was always a part of my upbringing. My mom would speak to me in Spanish, and my father had this tradition of each year driving us to Mexico in his Silverado. So we would drive from Washington, D.C. all the way to Orizaba. It was a 4-day trip. And so I'm like in both worlds pretty much since the age of a few months and 1 year old, 2 years old, and going back and forth to Mexico. So that exposure was already there. Then I think the first time that I actually took interest in other languages and thinking about this phenomenon of people speaking various languages, some that I had no familiarity with, was when my mom, she had a fascination with French, and she had French music that she liked to listen to, particularly that record that had come out by Serge Gainsbourg, if you guys are familiar, like Jane B and all those songs. It was like one of her favorite albums, and I found that sort of fascinating. It's like, wait a minute, there are these words that I don't know. I thought I would know everything, because I spoke English and Spanish, the only two languages that exist at the time. In Washington, D.C., the Mexican population was still very small during the late 70s. Then my mother taught me the French that she knew, several phrases, and it grew from there, and I took an interest and started to research it on my own. By the time I got to elementary school, I was learning it out of my own research. That's pretty much how it began.
Well, so you were lucky enough to have a bilingual upbringing, which is a great start. And many of us in the language learning community often dream of having that kind of opportunity with parents who are aware of other languages, and even speaking them is fantastic. And so, when you started working, I guess, for you, speaking languages was normal. So how did the interest with all of the other languages come about?
That came about in junior high school and then high school. As time progressed, I took an interest in German. In my teenage years, my father served in the army, and he served alongside Germans that were stationed. Then my father taught me the German that he knew, and he had some books, and I found a small German dictionary, and I started learning words from there. At the time that we were reading up on World War II and the Diary of Anne Frank and that story, I was pretty much put in charge in the class with reading all the German parts that would pop up in the story here and there. And my teacher and all the students would say, "Vaughn, how do you pronounce this word?" Aufmachen, da drinnen, etc. All the phrases that appear in the story of the Diary of Anne Frank. Moving on 1 year later, I moved back with my father in Washington, D.C., and I attended Alice Steele Junior High School, and noticed that there was much more of an international makeup in the students at the school. Unfortunately, the French students that I met were not too willing to assist me with learning French, so that just kind of stood at the standstill. However, there were Russians. There was a Russian exchange student, Misha, who attended Alice Steele the first year that I was there, and I took an interest in learning Russian. I memorized the Russian alphabet, started to borrowed the Berlitz Russian from the library, and just read through the lessons and pretty much learned it pretty quickly. And the embassy kids that lived on the Russian compound would attend the school, and then Wilson High School the following year. And I was speaking with them. We became friends, and I was on the fast track to learning Russian. And the Slavic languages followed because of it. Verika Simonova, who was on the Czech embassy, and a good friend of mine, Peter Ruzinski, who was himself Slovak, and he said, "Wait a minute, we have the Slovak language too." And the Slavic languages pretty much kicked off at that time. Russian, Czech, and Slovak, I sort of learned the three of them all at once.
Okay, so my head's spinning at this point. I don't know about anybody else, but it's learning Czech and Slovak at the same time. I mean, I've tried Slovak. I studied Czech at university in Prague. Didn't your head explode, or didn't they just turn into a horrible mushy mess? No. What can I say? I mean, were there certain techniques that you used? Were you just practicing back to back? How were you doing it to keep them separate?
Well, I think that one of the key things here is that I had I'd so memorized the words with such ease that I'd look at a word, maybe study it later. I found the two key helpful things is to really just try to get into the conversation, ask questions, try to make a small conversation just to begin with, and when the teacher, who is a native speaker of the language, sees that you're putting in an effort, but in the majority of my experiences, they just continue on with it. So, okay, well, let's push this further. This is working. What's really encouraging to them is how easy it is for me to learn. So it encourages that person to teach me. The most important things, try to get in the conversation, and if you're not with that person, you want to memorize vocabulary, don't push yourself too hard. Don't concentrate all at one time. Like, make a list of words, read it once, go do some other activity, come back to it, read it later. Just disperse the time that you're trying to learn vocabulary. It's a very good method, and it just doesn't put too much pressure on your brain.
Well, and I mean, getting into all of these languages, I mean, as you were getting older, did the internet ever start to play a part in all of this? And did you ever discover anybody else with this passion before the article in the Washington Post?
Yeah, when I was on Facebook, one time I think I saw that there was this, there's like the Polyglot page. You know, that Polyglot page? Weird. So I signed up for that, and I became a member on it, and I'd see other people's posts and things that they're learning. Other than that, yes, in Washington, D.C., there is a D.C. language exchange, something affiliated with the couch surfing crowd. And every week, particularly on Sunday, we say like 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., they would meet up, say, if it were a nice day outside, they'd meet up at Meridian Hill Park in D.C., or they'd choose a bar. And we can get a crowd of anywhere from the smallest I've seen is like 15 to 20 people up to upwards of 50 people, young people that are interested in a language exchange. Most of them are learning Brazilian Portuguese, Spanish, French. We have a lot of Arabic speakers there as well, some Russian speakers. Once in a while, I'll run into someone who speaks Finnish or Latvian. That's prior to that, I really haven't noticed much on the internet. I learned all these languages before the internet was a thing, was a tool for me. Just those two. Besides that, I use the Duolingo app. I started to use that. I learned Welsh with that, and also the Pimsleur. That's on my phone as well.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it was a very different world before the advent of the internet, and obviously it's now great that you can be part of this community too, and sort of involved, and you come to the conference. So I'm particularly pleased about that, especially because you've got this connection to Mexico, and you said your mum's from Veracruz, and you've got family from here, and I understand also that you studied some of the local languages, not just Spanish. So can you tell me a little bit more about your journey with the indigenous languages of Mexico?
All right, so surrounding the town of Orizaba, which comes from the Nahuatl word Ahuelizapan, the place of the joyous waters, that's in the state of Veracruz, at the foot of the Pico de Orizaba, also known in Nahuatl as Citlaltepec, which means Star Mountain. My mother herself, although we do have native blood in our lineage, we immediately did not speak the Nahuatl language. However, I took a great interest in it in my younger years, but couldn't find resources for it until one day my cousin said, hey, my cousin is related to this cousin, and they are authorities in the Nahuatl language. Let's go and meet them. So we go to Rafael Delgado, which is about 3 or so kilometers south of the city of Orizaba. And I'm in this town that my mother used to take us to when we were little. So my mother knew of this language, but we never really learned it in our immediate family, even on the Mexican side of our family. But here is Armando Alonso Limon. He's a professor at a school, a fluent speaker, and all of his family speaks it. And we had this little exchange. This happened when I was about 20 years old, so this was in 95, the first time I actually met people that were going to actively teach me. And I said, look, I'd like to learn the Nahuatl language. And in exchange, I see that he's very interested in art. I said, I'll show you how to paint and draw, the principles of design, the elements of design, how to paint, and we'll do a little exchange. And we set this for a Tuesday, I think, and the time came. It was a beautiful sunny day. I take the bus to Rafael Delgado, and I go into Armando's house, and he sets up in his living room, and I was pleasantly surprised that at the same time, there were about 5 other young people all there with their pencils and books who themselves would like to start to study Nahuatl. And it was this sort of like this communal thing. They were inspired by the fact that I wanted to learn. So like, okay, this is pretty exciting. Let's begin. And so he's teaching me words. Cali, which means house. It's Quintli. So ne, te, all of the pronouns. And this pretty much kicked off with the Nahuatl language. I've studied it over that period since 95. Every visit to Mexico, I'd spend time with him. I'd teach him how to draw and paint. His skills really developed thanks to my teachings. Otherwise, no one would have showed him. And he teaches art to his students thanks to the techniques that I showed him. And it was just this big exchange, and I can speak it pretty well at this point.
And it's pretty impressive, and using other ways to connect to another person as well, with not just your linguistic skills, but also your artistic skills. There's something quite nice about that kind of cultural and knowledge exchange between human beings, I think, that makes language learning quite special. How do you compare that to, say, a language you've learned in a more sort of a sterile fashion, I guess, would be the best way, maybe like with an app or something?
With an app, it's, of course, there's no person involved. It's very different, and I have to concentrate on it in a different way. It goes back to the same technique as, making a list of words and looking at it. So the app is very useful. Not everything on Duolingo at the start of the app was very cut and dry, but I noticed that particularly with Welsh, whoever was in charge of putting together the curriculum for the Welsh language on Duolingo did a very good job, because the lessons were challenging. They would introduce new vocabulary in a very steady pace. It was not really the case for other things on Duolingo. So there's that. Then as far as Pimsleur is simply you're listening to a lesson for about 30 minutes, and it's a lot of repetition there. And I find that to be a little bit slow, but it's still pretty effective. It's very, very, very different, absolutely different from the methods of learning, like in a live setting with actual people. You cannot ask specific questions to Duolingo. You can't ask Pimsleur, well, what about this variety? Or like, what if I want to change the vocabulary this way? Or it doesn't suit exactly my needs. So it does not compare. It would not be my first choice. Always live learning is the best.
And since getting online and the advent of the internet, have there been other changes where you've met other people in communities, for example, or seen strategies used by other people that you've seen around the world that you've been able to adapt and adopt into your own learning?
Not exactly. I think it was just really encouraging to find that there are other polyglots. But as far as learning methods and adapting other ways into my learning, no, I really have not, other than the pure access to materials, or maybe like doing online exchange, asking people for certain languages like Latvian and Finnish. it's difficult to find people that speak those two languages, but I can speak them pretty well because I've had this lengthy conversations with them, spent time working at a bar where Latvians worked in DC. And since that happened a while ago, then the internet came, and I'm like, okay, well, how do I get in touch with the Latvian or Finnish speakers? Friends would find me on Facebook that I had known from years past, and sometimes we'll do a chat like on Facebook Messenger and that sort of thing. As far as the internet goes, it's pretty much the only tools that were helpful to me is simply like being able to chat with them and see text, because I'll have to read the text to make sure I get the spelling right. Whereas it's not something you can just do by speaking to someone on the phone. So very useful tools, and of course, being that it is a chat, if I would ever like to review the lesson or the words I was told, all I have to do is scroll up. Okay, let's look at this vocabulary again. So very helpful in that sense.
And in the beginning, I mentioned that you had got into this thing of languages and learning them, and you were working a regular job. And obviously, you've had quite a lot of attention since the Washington Post article, which is completely understandable and well-deserved. Has anything changed since then? I mean, in your life, what you want to do with your languages in different ways?
When the article came out, it was a pretty big sensation. First, I didn't. This is not something that I wanted. It's not something that I sought. It was my friend Trevor Davis, who had known me since before 2000, that always knew I had this gift for languages. He's the one who hooked me up with Jessica Conchera. Then the article came out. And it's all this time of me just not really being open about it. And so the biggest change here, the article is out. Okay, well, let me just, share this some more. It doesn't have to be a secret. I don't have to not tell people that I don't know anything. It's like most of my life, it was pretty much like that. Okay, I'll learn this, but no one needs to know. My friends used to, Gode Dango CV. Yeah, and just like to show me off at parties and such. I was like, no, it's like, here's my friend Ben. He speaks 17 languages. I'm like, no, okay. All right, let's get out of here. That's changed a lot since the article came out in April. It was funny. The first thing that happened after the CBS On the News story came out as a result of Steve having looked at the article and asking me to do a segment. I go to a coffee shop the following morning, and all these people have me on their phone. They're walking up to me, is this you? And people look at me, it's like, oh, it's you. I'm wearing that little, like, that silly, like, knit cap that I got on the Pacific Northwest Trail. And it's just pretty much exploded. I got emails that were forwarded to me from Jessica Conchera, the Washington Post writer, and requests and such for other interviews. And one of the most exciting one was the Aled Hughes from BBC Wales interviewed me. So I did a short interview in Welsh with a little Welsh that I knew, thanks to Duolingo and Teach Yourself or whatever. And I believe the very first conversation I had in Welsh was with you on Zoom. I had never spoken Welsh to anybody before that. So I'm using these words like, okay, I hope that these sentences make sense. Yeah, and the two more interviews in Spanish. I did one interview in Bulgarian and one for the FT1, I think, France television. They'd follow me on these jobs where I was cleaning carpets, and then we go to a cafe and speak. It was pretty much like a daily thing of emails and exposure, and me being just feeling really, really proud of myself. It was very different. It was just a very different feeling, and now it's out in the open, and people are just pointing me out everywhere. Yeah, that's that was like a very big change.
Yeah, well, I can imagine just how different that was. I mean, being sort of the party piece for a friend, and then all of a sudden everyone's at the same party. So, I mean, have you considered doing something different, or do you just enjoy your job that you're doing before?
I've always considered doing something different. I did work with languages when I was with the Central and East European Art Foundation. Yeah, I was speaking Czech and Slovak on a daily basis, answering phones, sometimes in Russian. I worked with a Romanian woman who was actually the mother of my friends from high school, from whom I learned Romanian from a brother and sister, the Suciu family, who were from the embassy. They stayed in the U.S. I worked with Rodica and speaking Romanian a lot on a daily basis. I worked with a Bulgarian woman as well. And I felt like I had a really good purpose when I was working at the foundation. It switched hands and then it was moved over to Prague back in 2013, at the beginning of 2013. And since then, pretty much stuck with other jobs. It's not that I enjoy, window tinting or canning kombucha or deliveries or carpet cleaning, these simple jobs that I have. They were just jobs that happened to come to me, and they allow me the flexibility of travel because I can pretty much choose my times. But I don't feel any significance in them. But I think that another factor that plays into that is just a really good work ethic. I don't complain about work. It's like someone gives me a job, yeah, I'll do it. But I think that's also a downfall because I'm too complacent with doing something that doesn't really suit me.
Yeah, I can actually empathize with you, and I find just tasks quite lethargic, actually, something that you can do and you can be in your own mind and your own thoughts. And so even if what you're doing isn't related to languages directly, it's the thinking time that actually counts. Do you ever experience that kind of thing too? And how does that play out when you're doing your other work? Do you ever get distracted and fit the wrong carpet?
No, I don't get distracted with work, but I'm always like playing music in my head. I have this thing of sometimes I'll play 2 or 3 songs at the same time. And it was weird when I found out that other people don't do that. I'm like, that's okay. So, and, or I'll just like, so there is that. There's a thinking time. I'm doing a lot of thinking and planning, like, what am I going to do today? Or just, having imaginary conversations in my head in other languages. That happens too. What's really fun is when I'll get customers that can speak a language that I'm trying to improve on. I've had customers that I can speak Finnish with, Latvian with, some Lithuanian or Turkish, and a plethora of other languages, Czech and Slovak and Russian. And of course, they're always pretty thrilled. We have a really big Habesha community in Washington, D.C. For those of you who do not know, people from Ethiopia, Amharic speakers, and the Amharic language plays an integral role in commerce in Washington, D.C. with the large Habesha population that we have. So the Amharic language is very useful. It's very pleasant to them. When I go to like a customer's house and they're Habesha, we can speak Beamarinya, the Amharic language, and I'll get practice here and there with that. It's always a really good time. Of course, that's not the majority of my customers, but that's my experience.
I mean, I just really love these experiences that you're sharing now and what life is like, living and working a regular job, not necessarily related to language. But many people ask me about how you integrate languages and how you learn languages when you have lots of things going on. And my answer is always exactly what you've described. You seek out the opportunities. So you use your thinking time, you use your downtime, your dead time, the time that you're not going to work or do other things on your study while you're working, thinking of conversations, while playing music in your head, if you're able to do that too. Even multiple songs, who knew? And also seeking out opportunity to speak to individuals you meet who use these languages. I think it's a beautiful illustration of really something that many of us can identify with and take on board. And when I started working as well, I was employed to work on the German team. And instead of just being content with working on the German team, I heard all the other teams around me using Portuguese and Spanish and French and all these other languages. And I just offered up my time. I said, well, when I'm not busy on calls in German, feel free to route your calls through to my phone. And I ended up with 8 different languages that I was using on a daily basis. So it's adding value to what you're doing. And okay, you could say, maybe I should get more money for that, and maybe you should. In reality, people aren't looking for multilingual people to that degree for most jobs. But there are very good ways and very good examples of how you can add value to your own working experience, your own life, and use your languages and improve your languages, potentially learn new ones in your head while you're working by practicing. Any other final advice that you'd like to give before I open the floor to questions?
Just keep at it. Don't be shy. If you're learning something, you have a target language. One of the most important things you can do is engage in conversation. You won't always get a pleasant answer, and that's fine because, everybody can go have diarrhea or whatever, but just don't worry about it. Don't worry about how you sound. Don't be shy. Take that initiative. Conversation with someone is the most important thing that you can do when learning.
Thank you so much, Vaughn. We've got 10 minutes for some questions. If any of you got any burning questions you'd like to ask, I see one hand up there. If you'd like to ask it, I'll repeat it here. We don't have a microphone in the room. So thank you for the question. The question was, is it important for you to have the exact pronunciation when you're learning a language, or does it not matter?
Well, it matters in two different ways. It matters to me. I want to be able to pronounce it correctly. It also matters to the listener on various degrees. I think one of the challenges is what a Slovenian friend told me. This is her take. I don't know how this resonates with other Slovenian speakers, but she says when you speak Slovenian, you need to get the pronunciation right, because if you do not, if you have an accent, it's wrong. They don't consider it. It's unacceptable. I think that was an extreme example of what I've heard. Some languages that have sounds that are difficult for Westerners to make, those create a challenge. For me, with some practice, I can get the pronunciation pretty close. That's an important thing for me. Whether or not other people interpret it to the criticism, to the speculations that other people need me to be able to speak with, I really haven't had a problem being understood as long as I've had sufficient practice for the pronunciation.
Entonces la cuestión es, ¿cómo podemos romper las primeras barreras para aprender el primer idioma que estamos aprendiendo? ¿Qué consejo puede dar?
Es una de las cosas más difíciles para una persona que esté aprendiendo su primer idioma extranjero. Lo más importante es tener confianza en sí mismo, es lo más importante. Y no ser tímido ante una persona. Hay que hablar el idioma fuerte, a voz alta. Yo enseño eso cuando estoy enseñando a los hijos de Armando, por ejemplo, hablar inglés. Les digo, es muy necesario durante la lección que diga, no tiene que ser exactamente correcta las palabras que están diciendo, pero lo más importante es echarle ganas, sí, esforzarse, tener la confianza de intentar. Todos vamos a cometer errores y la gente joven tiene ese miedo de cometer errores. No quieren que las personas le escuchen cometiendo errores, y eso es una cosa que sí les va a impedir su viaje de aprender. ¿Sí me explico bien? Lo más importante es tener confianza. Esto es una cosa que sí se puede hacer. Ya después de unos intentos de salir y hablar y prestar atención al intento de hablar es lo más importante. No tenga miedo de sus errores que van a cometer. Se van a cometer de dos modos, pero cometiendo esos mismos errores, uno aprende de sus mismos propios errores, y así va aprendiendo y va mejorando sus estudios en los idiomas. Hable en voz alta y no tenga miedo. Es una cosa que sí se puede hacer.
Según la escritura y como la forma de hablar el idioma, pues a veces no son las mismas cosas, ¿no? ¿Y cómo haces tú para preparar esto? ¿Preparas el oído y luego aprendes a escribir el idioma o leer el idioma? ¿O haces, cómo lo haces?
Bueno, en la manera que yo enseñaba, por ejemplo, a los niños del pueblo de Rafael Delgado, yo siempre les digo que, una cosa, he notado que cuando ellos van a sus escuelas y les enseñan inglés, les dan tarea, les enseñan cómo escribir la palabra y se concentran mucho en lo escrito y lo leer y no se enfocan bien, no prestan suficiente atención a lo que es el hablar, cómo pronunciar las palabras. Y tiene mucha razón la jovencita que acaba de preguntar esto, que es indispensable saber cómo decir las idiomas, es hablar. Lo más importante es hablar. Y el método que yo utilizo es así, que sí les enseño cómo se escribe una palabra, solamente es más para tener la palabra sobre papel, para marcar cuál es la palabra, cuáles son las palabras o las frases que ahorita vamos a revisar. Lo más importante para eso. Después, en su propio tiempo pueden memorizar lo escrito, pero ahí va, les enseño. Esto es lo que vamos a practicar. Ahora vamos a repetir. Y así, I live in this house. Les digo que repiten bien y que digan la frase o las palabras hasta acá que tengan confianza, que veo que sí están agarrando la pronunciación y que se pongan en práctica. Entonces, otra cosa que hago con los estudiantes es que guardo los papeles. Pongamos los libros a un lado y vamos a parar. Aquí vamos a arreglar una mesa y vamos a hacer como si estuviéramos en la escuela o si estuviéramos en la oficina o afuera comiendo o vamos afuera caminando. De ahí les pongo a prueba. Vamos a practicar. Aquí vamos a caminar. ¿Qué es esto? ¿Qué es aquella cosa? ¿Cómo se llama este río? ¿Qué es esto? ¿Qué es puente en inglés? Y así se desarrolla mucho su aprendizaje. Hablando, sí, ahora sí nos vamos a enfocar en hablar, es lo más importante. La comunicación en vivo, escuchar preguntas, responder diciendo las palabras y repetir, mucha repetición. Ya lo escrito, para eso es secundaria. Tarde o temprano sí van a aprender cómo es que se escribe, cómo escribir bien, a asociar las palabras con el escrito. Eso sí cuesta trabajo por lo mismo de que para un español hablante no corresponde lo escrito con así como suena palabras en inglés, por ejemplo. Tarde o temprano eso sí viene, pero así como les digo, bastante práctica, mucho más hablar y así va uno aprendiendo mejor.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos por venir, por la pregunta también. Thank you very much for coming and for your questions. And thank you very much, Vaughn, for your time. Jolt and Vaughn. It was an absolute pleasure to have you with us. And you're welcome to talk to Vaughn and ask him his questions, obviously outside the room too. Feel free to go to him, talk to him. He's very kind, very sweet, and always ready to talk. And especially if you want to speak in a different language. Thank you. Give him a round of applause.